I was constantly trying to find out from Sam just what this character was, where the basis of the character was, what I could.
Long before James Coburn became an Oscar winner, he had already made his mark with unforgettable performances in The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape. On screen, he looked fearless, sharp, and completely in control. Off-screen, however, the stories surrounding him were even more astonishing. Some sounded so unbelievable that people dismissed them outright, until interviews, eyewitnesses, and Coburn himself confirmed they were true. So which stories had Hollywood questioning what to believe? Join us as we uncover the remarkable moments that prove James Coburn's real life could be just as extraordinary as his films. James Coburn took 106 private lessons from Bruce Lee. James Coburn didn't just train with Bruce Lee. According to Lee himself, he became one of the very best students the martial arts legend ever taught. Considering the list included Steve McQueen, James Garner, Lee Marvin, Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate, and even future NBA star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, that's an astonishing claim. Yet the more time Coburn spent learning from Lee, the clearer it became that he wasn't treating martial arts like another Hollywood hobby. He was completely committed. By the time the two met in the 1960s, Coburn was already a major star thanks to films like The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and Our Man Flint. Bruce Lee, meanwhile, was still trying to establish himself in Hollywood while teaching Jeet Kune Do to celebrity clients. Their friendship reportedly began after Coburn witnessed Lee demonstrate his famous one-inch punch at a gathering. Feeling the power firsthand convinced Coburn he had to learn everything he could from him. That decision turned into an obsession. According to Bruce Lee biographer Matthew Polly, Coburn took more than 106 private lessons over 3 years, more than almost any other Hollywood student. He even converted one room of his home into a personal training space, modeled after Lee's own gym, so he could continue practicing between lessons. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. When Bruce Lee was later asked to name his best celebrity student, he admitted the choice came down to just two people, Steve McQueen and James Coburn. Lee admired McQueen's toughness and relentless drive, but he singled out Coburn for something different. He believed Coburn understood the philosophical side of Jeet Kune Do better than anyone else, a quality Lee considered just as important as physical skill. Remarkably, the relationship wasn't one-sided. While Lee transformed Coburn's outlook on discipline and self-improvement, Coburn also encouraged Lee to think bigger about his career. He urged him not to settle for limiting television roles and instead pursue the movie stardom he believed Lee deserved. Looking back, that advice helped steer Lee toward the films that made him an international icon, proving their friendship changed both men's lives in ways few people ever realized. Yet long before Coburn was a seasoned star trading philosophical wisdom with Bruce Lee, he was just another struggling actor looking for his big break. Keep watching to find out how James Coburn took a tiny role with just 11 lines and transformed it into an overnight ticket to Hollywood stardom. The 11 lines that turned James Coburn into an overnight Hollywood star. Most actors spend an entire movie trying to make audiences remember them. James Coburn did it with barely a dozen lines. At the time, it sounded almost impossible that a relatively unknown actor could walk into a film packed with established stars, say so little, and still become one of the people audiences talked about most afterward. That's exactly what happened. And once you see how it unfolded, it's easy to understand why this became one of the earliest James Coburn stories that people struggled to believe. When director John Sturges began casting The Magnificent Seven, Coburn wasn't the obvious choice. In fact, it was his friend Robert Vaughn who recommended him for the role of Britt, the quiet knife expert. By then, Coburn had already spent years paying his dues. Born in Nebraska and raised in Compton, California, he had served in the U.S. Army as a truck driver, worked as a disc jockey on Army radio, narrated military training films in Germany, studied under renowned acting teacher Stella Adler, and appeared in what felt like almost every television western on the air. Bonanza, Laramie, The Rifleman, Rawhide, and Perry Mason all helped sharpen the screen, presence that Hollywood was only beginning to notice. Then came the gamble. Instead of giving Britt long speeches or dramatic monologues, the film relied almost entirely on Coburn's presence. He spoke just 11 lines, an astonishingly small amount for a member of such a celebrated ensemble. But when the now famous knife sequence arrived, everything changed. Coburn's lightning-fast mid-air knife catch and his calm, unshakable confidence instantly made Britt one of the film's standout characters. Viewers left theaters talking about the quiet man who barely said anything, yet somehow dominated every scene he entered. That performance didn't just launch James Coburn's career. It created the cool, effortless screen persona that followed him for decades, proving that sometimes the actor who says the least leaves the biggest impression of all. And remarkably, that unforgettable breakthrough was only the first James Coburn story that sounded too unbelievable to be true. In fact, his skyrocketing fame almost landed him the lead in a low-budget Italian Western until a $10,000 price gap rerouted cinematic history. James Coburn nearly became the man with no name. Before Clint Eastwood became the mysterious gunslinger audiences still associate with him today, that legendary role was slipping through Hollywood's fingers. Several established actors passed on it, one after another, and a few people realized James Coburn came remarkably close to becoming the face of Sergio Leone's groundbreaking Western trilogy instead. It sounds like one of those Hollywood myths that grew bigger over time, but the truth is even more surprising. A single financial decision quietly reshaped two careers and changed the history of Western films forever. In 1963, Leone was searching for the perfect lead for what would become A Fistful of Dollars. Eastwood wasn't the obvious choice. At the time, he was best known for television's Rawhide and had even been dropped by Universal a few years earlier. Leone first looked at bigger names, including Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson, Rory Calhoun, Henry Silva, Steve Reeves, and James Coburn. Reeves declined, leaving Coburn as one of Leone's favorite choices for the role that would eventually become known around the world as the man with no name. There was just one problem. Coburn wanted $25,000. Leone's entire production couldn't stretch that far, so he reluctantly moved on and hired Eastwood instead for just $15,000. At the time, it probably seemed like an ordinary business decision. No one could have predicted that the little-known television actor would transform a fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly into one of cinema's most influential trilogies, while creating one of the most recognizable screen characters in film history. Ironically, history almost repeated itself a few years later. Leone approached Coburn again, this time for the role of harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West. Once again, negotiations collapsed over money, and Charles Bronson inherited another iconic part. It wasn't until 1971's Duck, You Sucker that Coburn and Leone finally worked together. By then, the opportunity that might have rewritten both men's careers had already become one of Hollywood's greatest what-if stories. James Coburn agreed to take LSD before it was banned. Today, admitting to taking LSD would probably end a Hollywood career, but when James Coburn agreed to do it, he wasn't sneaking around or breaking the law. He walked into a psychiatrist's office, took the drug under medical supervision, and became part of what scientists believed was groundbreaking research. It sounds impossible through a modern lens, yet for a brief period, some of Hollywood's most respected names were doing exactly the same thing. Convinced they were helping unlock the mysteries of the human mind, the movement was led by psychiatrist Dr. Oscar Janiger, whose Los Angeles study became one of the longest-running legal LSD experiments in the United States. More than 900 volunteers participated, including artists, writers, musicians, religious leaders, and actors. Among the most famous was Cary Grant, who underwent dozens of supervised sessions during the late 1950s and early 1960s. Grant openly credited the experience with changing his outlook on life, speaking so positively about the treatment that it encouraged others in Hollywood to take a closer look. James Coburn also participated in Janiger's research, taking legally prescribed LSD in carefully controlled sessions. Unlike the reckless image that would later define the drug, these weren't wild Hollywood parties or secret celebrity gatherings. Each participant took part individually under psychiatric supervision as researchers carefully observed the psychological effects. At the time, LSD hadn't yet become the symbol of the counterculture movement. It was viewed by many doctors as a promising tool for studying creativity, trauma, and human consciousness. That perception wouldn't last. As LSD spread beyond medical research and became associated with the turbulent counterculture of the 1960s, public opinion shifted dramatically. Governments outlawed it, research programs disappeared, and the drug became one of the most controversial substances in the world. Overnight, something that had once been considered legitimate scientific research became almost impossible to imagine. That's exactly why James Coburn's involvement still sounds unbelievable today, even though every part of it was completely legal when it happened. Yet his willingness to explore mind and body didn't stop in a doctor's office. It soon led him to a garage gym with the most dangerous man in Hollywood. Stick around to find out how James Coburn took over 100 private lessons from Bruce Lee and earned the martial arts legend's deepest respect. James Coburn carried Bruce Lee's casket after his shocking death. For James Coburn, Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial arts teacher or another Hollywood acquaintance. He was one of his closest friends. That's why, when Lee died suddenly at just 32 years old, Coburn wasn't watching the tragedy unfold from a distance. He was one of the few people entrusted with giving the martial arts legend his final farewell, a moment that revealed just how deep their friendship really was. Only months before his death, Bruce Lee had suffered a frightening medical emergency while working on Enter the Dragon. He collapsed during a recording session, was rushed to a Hong Kong hospital, and doctors discovered dangerous swelling on his brain. Although he recovered well enough to return to work, the incident raised serious concerns about his health. Then, on July 20th, 1973, everything changed. While meeting with producer Raymond Chow and actress Betty Ting to discuss Game of Death, Lee complained of a severe headache. After taking a painkiller, he lay down to rest, but never woke up. He was rushed to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Hong Kong, where doctors pronounced him dead on arrival. The news stunned the world. At only 32 years old, the man who had revolutionized martial arts cinema was gone. When family and friends gathered in Seattle for Lee's funeral, the people chosen to carry his casket reflected the relationships he valued most. Among them were Steve McQueen, Dan Inosanto, Taki Kimura, George Lazenby, Lee's brother Robert, and James Coburn. For Coburn, it was a deeply personal responsibility. After spending years training under Lee, sharing ideas, and building a friendship that extended far beyond martial arts, he helped carry his friend to his final resting place. It's an image that speaks louder than any interview ever could. James Coburn wasn't simply another celebrity paying his respects. He was one of the men Bruce Lee's family trusted to stand beside him until the very end, a powerful reminder that their bond was far deeper than most fans ever realized. Yet, while his intense loyalty earned him a place in Hollywood legend, Coburn's effortless star power could also command astonishing fortunes with almost no effort at all. Keep watching to find out how James Coburn turned just 2 spoken words into a staggering $500,000 paycheck. How James Coburn turned 2 words into a $500,000 paycheck. Hollywood stars are known for landing enormous paychecks, but James Coburn may have earned one of the easiest fortunes in the business. At the height of his popularity, a company handed him an astonishing $500,000 for a television commercial in which he spoke just 2 words. It sounds too outrageous to be true, yet that's exactly how valuable Coburn's unmistakable image and voice had become. The commercial was for the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company, which was promoting its new Schlitz light beer in 1977. Rather than giving Coburn a lengthy script or dramatic sales pitch, the advertisers understood that his cool, rugged presence did most of the work. His entire contribution was simply saying, "Schlitz Light." Those 2 words reportedly earned him $500,000, an extraordinary payday for a performance that lasted only seconds. By then, Coburn had become far more than a successful actor. Around the world, his distinctive look had become a brand of its own. In Japan, his rugged features made him so popular that he became the face of one of the country's leading cigarette brands. His connection to Japan extended beyond advertising. A lifelong car enthusiast whose passion began in his father's garage, Coburn built relationships with collectors there and even exported rare automobiles overseas, turning another personal interest into a successful business. His love of high-performance cars was legendary in Hollywood. Coburn owned an extraordinary collection of Ferraris, including a rare Ferrari 250 GT California Spider, one of only 56 ever built. He reportedly introduced his close friend Steve McQueen to the Ferrari brand, and after owning the Spider for more than 2 decades, he eventually sold it. Years later, the same car shattered auction records when it sold for more than $10 million, becoming the most expensive automobile ever sold at auction at the time. Even later in life, Coburn's unmistakable voice remained in demand. From Chevrolet's famous "Like a Rock" commercials to lucrative endorsement deals, companies kept paying a premium for something audiences instantly recognized. James Coburn had reached the rare point where simply showing up or saying 2 words was worth a fortune. He became part of rock music history. James Coburn didn't need to appear in a movie to become part of entertainment history. In one of the most unexpected moments of his career, the Hollywood tough guy ended up on the cover of what would become Paul McCartney's biggest post-Beatles album. At first glance, it looks like a random celebrity gathering. But once you learn why Coburn was standing there and what had happened before that photograph was taken, the image tells a much bigger story. By 1973, Paul McCartney was determined to prove he could succeed without the Beatles. He and Wings traveled to Lagos, Nigeria to record Band on the Run, believing the change of scenery would inspire a fresh creative chapter. Instead, almost everything that could go wrong did. Before they even arrived, 2 members of the band had quit. Once in Nigeria, the recording studio fell well short of expectations, equipment problems slowed production, and the challenges kept piling up. The biggest shock came when Paul and Linda McCartney were robbed at knife point while walking through Lagos. The thieves escaped with a bag containing demo tapes and handwritten lyrics, leaving the band wondering whether months of work had been lost forever. To make matters worse, after returning to England, McCartney discovered that EMI had mailed a warning about a cholera outbreak in Nigeria before the trip even began, but the letter didn't reach them until they were safely home. Against all odds, the band completed the album in London, transforming a troubled recording process into one of the most celebrated records of McCartney's solo career. When it came time to create the cover, McCartney wanted something that reflected the album's central idea of escape. Photographer Clive Arrowsmith gathered an unusual mix of famous faces at Osterley Park in West London, staging them as fugitives frozen in the beam of a prison searchlight. Alongside Paul, Linda, and Denny Lane stood actor Christopher Lee, television host Michael Parkinson, boxer John Conte, broadcaster Clement Freud, entertainer Kenny Lynch, and, surprisingly, James Coburn. Coburn wasn't there because he had anything to do with the music. He was invited because his unmistakable screen presence perfectly matched the dramatic mood McCartney envisioned. Decades later, millions of people still recognize the Band on the Run cover, often without realizing one of Hollywood's greatest Western stars is staring right back at them from one of rock music's most iconic images. Yet holding his own alongside rock royalty was nothing compared to the chaos awaiting him on set. How James Coburn kept Cross of Iron from falling apart. Most people remember James Coburn as the rugged star of Cross of Iron. What many don't realize is that behind the cameras, he reportedly took on an even bigger responsibility. As production spiraled into chaos, Coburn found himself doing something almost no leading actor expects to do, stepping in to help finish directing the film. It's one of those Hollywood stories that sounds too dramatic to be true, yet it reveals just how much faith everyone had in him. Released in 1977, Cross of Iron reunited Coburn with legendary filmmaker Sam Peckinpah, whose reputation for making gritty, uncompromising films was already well established. Set on the brutal Eastern Front during World War II, the story follows Sergeant Rolf Steiner, a battle-hardened German soldier played by Coburn, whose conflict with an ambitious Prussian officer exposes the class divisions within the German army. Adapted from Willy Heinrich's novel, The Willing Flesh, the film was shot on location in Yugoslavia under demanding conditions that tested both the cast and crew. Those pressures were made even worse by Peckinpah's personal struggles. Throughout filming, the acclaimed director battled severe alcohol problems that reportedly affected his ability to stay in control of the production. Rather than allowing the project to unravel, Coburn stepped in whenever necessary, helping guide scenes and keep filming moving while Peckinpah was unable to continue. It wasn't an official change in directors, but those who worked on the production acknowledged that Coburn's leadership became essential in getting the movie across the finish line. Remarkably, the crisis never damaged their friendship. Peckinpah and Coburn remained close until the director's death in 1984, a testament to the mutual respect they shared, despite the difficulties they endured making the film. Although Cross of Iron received a mixed response in the United States upon release, European audiences embraced it, and its reputation only grew with time. Today, many critics regard it as one of Peckinpah's finest achievements, and few viewers realize that one of the reasons the film reached theaters at all was because James Coburn quietly helped hold the production together when it needed him most. A disease nearly ended his career. At the height of his career, James Coburn looked unstoppable. Then, almost without warning, he seemed to disappear from Hollywood. Fans wondered why one of the industry's most recognizable leading men was making so few films throughout the 1980s. Some assumed he had simply stepped away from acting. The truth was far more heartbreaking. Behind the scenes, Coburn was fighting a disease that left him in relentless pain and slowly transformed his body. Coburn suffered from severe rheumatoid arthritis, an autoimmune disease that attacked his joints with devastating force. As the condition worsened, even the simplest movements became exhausting. His hands gradually twisted as tendons shortened, his joints stiffened, and standing up could trigger such intense pain that he would begin sweating. Looking back years later, Coburn described the experience in brutally honest terms, saying it felt as though his body was slowly turning to stone. For an actor known for his physical presence and effortless confidence, the illness threatened not only his career, but also his independence. For nearly 2 decades, Coburn searched desperately for relief. He tried conventional medicine, alternative therapies, and countless treatments, hoping something would restore the life he once had. Nothing seemed to work. The pain continued to dictate every decision he made, forcing him to accept fewer roles and spend much of the 1980s away from the screen. To many fans, it looked like a quiet career slowdown. In reality, he was enduring a private battle that few people fully understood. Then, in 1996, everything changed. Coburn began taking methylsulfonylmethane, better known as MSM, a sulfur compound commonly sold in health food stores. He later described the improvement as almost immediate. While he never claimed it cured his rheumatoid arthritis, he said it relieved enough of the pain to let him move freely again. Convinced by the results, he enthusiastically recommended it to others suffering from similar conditions. The renewed mobility gave Coburn something he had almost lost forever: his career. He returned to acting with fresh energy, eventually delivering the acclaimed performance in Affliction that earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. After years of unimaginable pain, James Coburn proved that one of his greatest victories happened long after the cameras had stopped rolling, and that miraculous comeback set the stage for a moment that Hollywood will never forget. The award James Coburn thought might never come. After everything James Coburn had survived, from missed career-changing roles to years of crippling illness, Hollywood still had one final surprise waiting for him. It wasn't another blockbuster or another famous Western. It was the one honor that had eluded him for nearly half a century. And when it finally arrived, almost no one expected his name to be the one announced. In 1999, Coburn earned his first Academy Award nomination for playing the abusive father Glenn Whitehouse in Affliction. The performance was haunting, restrained, and unlike the cool, charismatic characters that had made him famous decades earlier. Even so, many believed the Oscar belonged to one of the other nominees, including Robert Duvall, Billy Bob Thornton, Ed Harris, or Jeffrey Rush. Coburn was widely viewed as the outsider in one of the strongest supporting actor lineups of the decade. Then came the upset. When his name was called, the audience erupted. After decades of unforgettable performances in films like The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, James Coburn finally stood on the Academy Award stage holding the first Oscar of his career. Reflecting on Affliction, he once said, "Some of them you do for money. Some of them you do for love. This is a love child." That passion showed in every scene, making the victory feel less like a surprise and more like Hollywood finally recognizing what audiences had known for years. Sadly, the celebration would not last long. On November 18, 2002, Coburn suffered a fatal heart attack at his Beverly Hills home. His wife, Paula, later revealed that he died peacefully in her arms as they listened to music together before he was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. He was 74 years old. Looking back, it's remarkable how many James Coburn stories once sounded too unbelievable to be true, yet every one of them happened. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all. Behind the effortless cool was a man whose real life proved to be every bit as extraordinary as the legends Hollywood created around him. What James Coburn's story is hard for you to believe? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.